Picture a truck. It is 1961. The truck is axle deep in a Danish farm road, engine screaming, going nowhere. In the back, 14,000 plastic bricks wrapped in cardboard, bound for a distributor in Hamburg who needed them last Tuesday. The driver has been here before. He will be here again. The road does not care that the order is late. The road does not care about anything. Same coordinates. 2026. You're now standing inside one of the busiest cargo terminals in Northern Europe. 3.5 million passengers a year. Direct routes to 37 cities. 19,000 tons of freight annually move through a terminal in a Danish farming village of 6,000 people. Billund Airport handles more air cargo per capita than Copenhagen. And here is the part nobody tells you. Denmark did not build it. The EU did not fund it. There was no infrastructure program, no regional development grant, no sovereign wealth injection. The Danish government was asked. They said no. A toy company built it. One man, using revenue from plastic bricks, poured a commercial-grade concrete runway into a cow pasture and dared the airlines to land on it. What Godtfred Kirk Christiansen constructed in rural Jutland was not really an airport. It was a proof of concept for how a single, private corporation can permanently redraw the economic map of a country and then hand the deed back to the state once the value has been fully extracted. This is one of the most audacious corporate maneuvers of the 20th century. Almost nobody knows it happened. To understand why Godtfred Kirk Christiansen eventually did something as insane as building a commercial airport, you have to understand the trap he was born into. Billund is not a city. It is not even a large town. In the early 1950s, it was a farming village in the flat middle of Jutland, the Danish mainland peninsula, sitting roughly equidistant from every coastline and connected to everything by roads that were generously an afterthought. There was no railway, there was no motorway. There was the kind of infrastructure that made sense if your primary ambition was growing potatoes. Lego's ambition was considerably larger than that. By 1955, Godtfred had launched the system of play. The idea was radical and simple. Every brick was compatible with every other brick forever. It was not a toy, it was a platform. And the moment that concept landed in the hands of children across West Germany, France and Britain, demand did not grow, it detonated. The factory in Billund could barely keep pace. But the factory was only half the problem. Getting the product out of Billund was the other half, and it was killing them. Every export order meant loading trucks and driving them north to the port at Esbjerg, or northeast toward Copenhagen, on roads that turned to mud in winter and dust in summer. A journey that should have taken hours stretched into days. Distributors in Munich or London waited. Shelf space sat empty. Competitors, many of them sitting on top of actual transport networks, moved faster. Godtfred ran the numbers repeatedly, hoping they would change. They never did. Every kilometre of bad road between his factory and the outside world was a tax he was paying on every single brick he sold. Geography, not product quality, was the thing most likely to kill Lego. And geography, unlike a competitor, could not be outdesigned. The solution Godtfred reached for first was the obvious one, or at least it was obvious to a man of his temperament. He bought a plane. In 1958, the Lego company acquired a small private aircraft and hired a pilot. The logic was straightforward. If the roads were the problem, leave the roads behind. Fly the executives to the distributors. Fly Godtfred to the trade fairs. Compress the relationship between the factory in Billund and the markets in Hamburg and London from a 2-day ordeal into a 2-hour flight. It worked, in a narrow sense. Godtfred's personal productivity exploded. He could be in Copenhagen for a morning meeting and back in Billund for lunch. He could attend a toy fair in Nuremberg and be home before dark. The plane was not a luxury. It was a weapon, and he used it like one. But a weapon is only as good as its base of operations. And the base of operations, in this case, was a grass strip in a cow pasture on the edge of town. It was serviceable for a small propeller aircraft in good weather, It was considerably less serviceable in bad weather, which in Jutland arrives reliably and stays for weeks. It could not handle anything heavier than a light aircraft. It could not handle cargo in any meaningful volume. It was, for all the ambition it represented, a farmer's field with better intentions. Godtfred flew in and out of that pasture and watched the freight problem remain unsolved below him. The executives could travel, the bricks could not. He had tasted independence. He had felt what it was like to be free of the roads. Now he needed to scale that freedom to the scale of the actual business, and a grass strip was not going to do it. He needed concrete. The rational next move was to ask for help. So Godtfred asked. He approached the local municipality of Vile County. He made the case clearly. Billund was becoming an economic engine for the entire region. Lego was growing faster than almost any manufacturing company in Denmark, and a proper paved airstrip would benefit not just the toy factory, but the entire surrounding area. The municipality listened politely. The municipality said no, there was no budget. Rural Jutland was not an infrastructure priority. The roads were the roads, and the fields were the fields, and that was, more or less, the official position of the Danish state regarding the logistics ambitions of a plastic brick manufacturer. Godtfred went to the national government. Same answer, differently phrased. There is a specific kind of rage that builds in a person who can see the solution clearly and is being told by every responsible institution that the solution is not their problem. Godtfred Kirk Christiansen was not a patient man under ordinary circumstances. Under these circumstances, patience was not a concept he found especially useful. He had a factory producing hundreds of millions of bricks a year. He had distributors in 15 countries. He had a grass strip in a field. And he had a government that had decided none of this was sufficient reason to pour concrete. Fine, he would pour it himself. The decision was made not in a boardroom with consultants and financial models, but with the particular clarity that arrives when every alternative has been exhausted. If the state would not build the infrastructure, the corporation would, and the corporation would do it properly, or not at all. What properly meant in practice was terrifying. Building a commercial-grade concrete runway capable of handling real cargo aircraft was not a minor capital project. It required surveying, land acquisition, drainage engineering, lighting systems, navigation equipment, and enough reinforced concrete to make a serious dent in Lego's cash reserves. This was not a company that had been publicly listed and was playing with institutional money. This was a family business, and the family was betting a substantial portion of its financial survival on the belief that cargo airlines would actually agree to use a runway built by a toy manufacturer in a village nobody had heard of. The construction began in the early 1960s. Godtfred committed to building a runway of 1,800 meters, long enough to handle the turboprop freight aircraft of the era, with a proper asphalt surface and the infrastructure to support commercial operations. The total investment was enormous relative to Lego's size at the time. Internally, the numbers made people uncomfortable. There was no guarantee that SAS or any other carrier would agree to route cargo through Billund. There was no precedent for any of this. No corporate manual existed for the chapter titled "What to do when you decide to build an airport." Godtfred understood that he was not really building a runway. He was building an argument, a physical, concrete argument, that Billund deserved to exist on the global logistics map. The runway was the sentence. The question was whether anyone would read it. The concrete was poured, the lights were installed, the fences went up around a facility that was, by any objective measure, more serious than anyone had expected a toy company to produce. On a morning in 1964, the first scheduled commercial aircraft touched down at Billund Airport. The runway held, the tarmac did not crack, the landing gear did not disappear into soft earth. The aircraft rolled to a stop on a surface that had been farmland 3 years earlier, built entirely with corporate capital, because the Danish government had declined to be interested. Godtfred watched it land. He had wagered his company's financial stability on this moment, on the premise that if he built it correctly, the airlines would come. The airlines came. The inauguration of Billund Airport in 1964 was not merely a logistics milestone. It was a declaration. A toy company in a farming village had just demonstrated that private capital, applied with sufficient conviction, could produce infrastructure that sovereign governments had deemed unnecessary. The runways were real, the navigation lights were real, the terminal was real. All of it had been funded by the sale of interlocking plastic bricks to children across Western Europe. The local and national press covered the opening with a kind of bewildered respect. Here was a factory owner who had looked at the map, decided the map was wrong, and corrected it at his own expense. Danish officials who had previously declined to fund the project attended the ceremony. There is a specific genre of institutional awkwardness that occurs when a private citizen does the job that the government refused to do and then invites the government to celebrate it. That was 1964 in Billund. The concrete was Legos. The ribbon was cut by everyone. Once the runway existed, everything changed in ways that even Godtfred had not fully anticipated. The original problem was executive travel and export logistics. The runway solved both. But what a commercial-grade airport actually does, when it appears in a region that previously had none, is collapse the geography of that region entirely. Within months of the 1964 opening, Lego began routing significant export volume directly through Billund. Instead of loading trucks to Esbjerg or Copenhagen, bricks went by air. The turnaround time on export orders dropped dramatically. A distributor in the UK placing an order on Monday could have the product on a shelf by Wednesday. That speed was not available to competitors who were still dependent on road freight and container shipping, but the transformation went deeper than Lego's own supply chain. Billund Airport began attracting cargo traffic from other regional businesses. Suppliers started routing components through Billund rather than through the major ports. The airport created a logistics ecosystem around itself, and that ecosystem began drawing economic activity to a region that had previously had very little reason to attract it. By the late 1960s, Billund was no longer merely the home of a toy factory. It was a freight node. Companies located in Jutland that had previously been penalised by geography now had access to a cargo hub. The airport had effectively subsidised the competitiveness of an entire regional economy, and it had done so not because a government planned it, but because a toy manufacturer needed to get his product to Hamburg faster than a truck could manage. Infrastructure, it turned out, does not wait for permission. In 1968, Lego opened Legoland, a theme park built on 60,000 square meters of land adjacent to the factory in Billund. It was not, at first glance, an obvious business decision. Lego made bricks. Lego did not make theme parks. But Godtfred understood something that most manufacturers never figure out. The airport had already solved the distribution problem. People could now get to Billund easily. The question was what they would do when they arrived. The theme park answered that question, and it answered it spectacularly. Legoland Billund attracted 625,000 visitors in its first year. It drew families from across Denmark, West Germany, Sweden, and the UK. And every single one of those families arrived via Billund Airport, the runway that a toy company had poured into a cow pasture 4 years earlier because the government would not. Without the airport, Legoland would have been a local curiosity, an attraction for the children of Jutland farmers with no realistic mechanism for reaching an international audience. With the airport, it became one of the most visited tourist destinations in Northern Europe. The runway had not just solved a freight problem, it had accidentally created the precise precondition required for a theme park empire. By the mid-1970s, the airport and the theme park were feeding each other in a loop that no economic planner had designed and no government had funded. Visitors flew in to see the park. The park gave the airport passenger volume. The passenger volume justified expanded routes. The expanded routes brought more visitors. Godtfred had not built an airport. He had built a flywheel. By the early 1970s, LEGO had achieved what it set out to achieve. The infrastructure problem that had nearly strangled the company in the mid-1950s was not just solved, it had been inverted. Billund was no longer a geographic liability, it was a competitive advantage. The airport was generating revenue, attracting regional businesses, supporting Legoland, and functioning as a genuine commercial aviation hub in a way that no privately built airport in rural Denmark had any business doing. And at that point, Godtfred did something that is, in retrospect, the most strategically elegant move of the entire operation. He gave it away. In 1974, LEGO transferred ownership of Billund Airport to a newly established public foundation. The management of the airport passed from corporate to institutional hands. The asset that LEGO had built, funded and operated for a decade became, in effect, a public good. The toy company walked away from the thing it had constructed, leaving behind a functioning piece of national infrastructure, as though it were the most natural exit in the world. The genius of this was not accidental. By handing over the airport, LEGO shed the ongoing operational costs and regulatory burden of running a public aviation facility. It crystallized the goodwill it had accumulated with the Danish government and the local municipality. It converted a corporate liability on the balance sheet into a permanent piece of civic infrastructure that would continue to serve LEGO's interest for free forever, because the routes and the ecosystem and the logistics advantages LEGO had created did not disappear with the transfer of ownership. They kept the flywheel, they gave away the engine room. Billund Airport today is Denmark's second busiest airport. It handled approximately 3.5 million passengers in 2023 and connects Jutland directly to destinations across Europe, with routes expanding annually through carriers including Ryanair, EasyJet, and Scandinavian Airlines. The freight terminal processes cargo that supplies not just LEGO, but an entire regional manufacturing economy. The airport supports an estimated 10,000 jobs in the surrounding area and contributes billions of kroner annually to the Jutland economy. None of that existed before a toy company decided to pour concrete. The lesson here is not about LEGO specifically. The lesson is about what infrastructure actually is and who actually builds it. The conventional story is that governments build the roads and the airports and the ports, and private companies use them to get rich. Billund is the counter-argument. It is the proof that when a corporation has a large enough problem and a long enough time horizon, it can build the infrastructure itself, capture the returns, and then transfer the asset to the public at the moment that maximizes goodwill and minimizes ongoing cost. Godtfred Kirk Christiansen did not set out to build a public airport. He set out to get his trucks out of the mud. The airport was just the solution that the problem required. What he left behind was a permanent restructuring of the economic geography of central Denmark, anchored by a runway, powered by plastic bricks, and handed to the government with a bow on top. The map of Denmark today has Billund on it because a toy company got tired of waiting. That is the LEGO effect. And if that is the kind of story you want more of, the ones about the corporations that rewrote the rules quietly, the ones that most people walked past without noticing, then subscribe. There are more of them. There are far more of them than you think.